And to start, near-field exploration is not exploration. It's a different animal. It's a different ecosystem, and it needs to be treated as a system, and it's not. And last few months, I've spoken to a lot of people in a lot of different companies, and everyone seems to feel there's not so much of a focus on it, and people are doing it, but their standards are not there. When you speak to different people, the question comes up, who should own it? The exploration function or the assets, the producing assets? And different companies have different solutions. So if you ask the people in the assets, they'll generally say that explorers, you know, they're pretty good, but they don't understand the granularity. We have our own operating rhythm. We know the geology. We also know the dynamic response to pressure changes, and they don't dig deep enough. If you ask the explorers, they'll generally say, well, you know, that's what we do for a living. We go to different basins, we see different play types, and even though we may not have the local expertise, we're the ones to come in. And besides, for those that have worked in an asset, you know, in the morning when you get your report of producing field, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and you're overworked, and so the question is an important one. Who owns it? So kind of to emphasize it, I want to ask a question. I don't know if we have people in the audience with producing assets, but if you went back to your office next week and you saw the vice president and he said, what's the most important thing in our culture? What do we watch all the time here? What would that be? One word. Any takers? Production. Production is one word. Another word might be safety, production safety, and money. Money, making money, not getting closed down. You know, all those things. And if you speak to people in exploration, of course, it might be discovery. I would ask you guys, but you know, I'd get 3 answers from every geologist here. So it'd be probably discovery. And so the question is, the cultures are very, very different between the producing asset and exploration, something we all know. And so the question of who owns it is very important for properly organizing a near-field exploration system. So when you look at this, what are the asset people? Well, they believe in continuous optimization, passion for innovation, and lean manufacturing. They're a lot better than the exploration people. Exploration people, maybe we roll our eyes a little bit at that. It's not so applicable. Or is it? If you look at the lean, and this is from Hess, 60% improvement in drilling completion costs over some time using lean manufacturing principles. So does this really apply to exploration? Well, in a way, if you kind of stand on your head and look at that curve a little differently, it looks something like a creaming curve. And so in discussions with lean experts, I'd say, you know, explorers do lean exploration. They don't call it that. They maybe call it play-based exploration. But the idea is the same. You're deconstructing a system. You're taking the components, optimizing them. But the difference is with production and repetitive processes, you're going to drop that red curve quite a bit. But with exploration and diminishing processes, you kind of run out of stuff. And so the difference is that the diminishing processes of the explorationists are saying that you have to have something else, and that something else starts with data mining. Data mining is something that it's surprising how many companies don't do it systematically in their mature areas. It's not geomodeling. It's data-driven, not model-driven. Here's an example. On the right are 4 seismic attribute maps for a particular reservoir. And those attribute maps, doesn't matter what they are or what the reservoir is, but when you take them and you compare them to normalized well logs, you have calibration points and you have seismic data. And then when you use a QI module in Petrel or perhaps Icon Science plugins, you get a lot of information that enables you to create business guidelines on where to drill. This is the realm of machine learning, but it didn't start here. Some people we're using this with Schlumberger back in the geoframe days with ResSum and the size class, making neural networks. Really works, and data mining is the first value addition that's really important for near-field exploration. And if it's done properly, what data mining will do, like the lean approaches for the engineering people, is take that play that's being developed and squeeze out the last commercial drop of oil for it. And it's a very important thing. And looking just at this, one might say, well, perhaps the near-field exploration needs to be done in the asset more than with the exploration function. But the problem with that is that the local skill sets that are good with data mining and finding the last drop of commercial oil, they won't move the needle. To move the needle, you have to find either the next play or the next variation on the current play, the stratigraphic play similar to the one that's being done. And that means that the answer to the question of who owns near-field exploration is both own it. You have the exploration people and you have the production people, and particularly if you have an international company, what you need to do is get them to collaborate. And the only way to do that is with a cloud-based approach. In my experience isn't as sophisticated as what we saw this morning, but it's really in the right direction. The idea is you want to put Studio in the cloud and have the people in the home office, the exploration SMEs working with the asset people, bringing that expertise over the ocean and leveraging the technical depths. It's not always to do because exploration and production people have different cultures, different operating rhythms. If you put a dog and a cat in a cage, you know, they're not going to sing pretty song. And so what's really important, and one really important message to take away, is that when you're doing near-field exploration with a distributed virtual oil company, it's very important you put your best people in a position with the asset that understand both exploration and production and reduce the impediments to efficiency. And they were talking about that this morning too, a little bit. And once you get there, and once you're over in that situation, well, what you're starting to do is develop a culture and an organization that is more conducive to near-field exploration. Well, every culture has its own language, and I would argue that the lingua franca and the language of near-field exploration has to be models. And even though many explorers in the audience may say models are a bit overkill for frontier-type exploration, they might be right. When you're trying to improve the handoff from exploration to pre-development to development to production, a model-based approach is really the way to go. And not only that, with models these days, you can get a lot access to some very powerful technologies you simply can't do with maps. And these technologies are really quite important for near-field exploration. Top of the list to me is a closed-loop seismic modeling. It's an emerging technology where you basically take your inverted seismic data, you take your well logs and core, calibrate that data set, and then using fluid substitution or perhaps saturation height modeling, you create different static models that might or might not be closer to the actual geologic model. And then you forward model all of that and compare it to the field data. And in that way, closed-loop seismic modeling closes the loop from geomodeling, inversion, and log analysis and all that. And it's very, very powerful. And it's especially powerful in near-field exploration because, as I showed on the last slide, you have simultaneously, you're trying to use data mining techniques to pull out the last drop of the existing play, and you're using frontier, or you might want to call backyard techniques here, where the explorationists are better at. It's unconstrained, and you've got things like basin modeling, seismic stratigraphy, palimpsestic restorations. And so when you have that all done on the same model, that's a very powerful way to go. But the models, boy, I'm really hitting all the words that they had this morning, aren't I? They were talking about evergreen and cloud, but it's really true. you want to keep your models evergreen. It's so important. When you're doing near-field exploration, there's a tendency in this price environment not to reprocess or spend the money you need to get the data up to snuff, and that's a mistake. You need to take your seismic, mega-merge it, and do all the correct processing. You need to then take your logs, bring them in. Everything has to be in that model, and if you don't, you're going to run into some problems, as that quote will explain to you. So that's kind of a weird picture for a bunch of oil and gas people, but one of the things that's pretty important to remember is that whatever countries we're from, when you go home and you walk in the local park, you'll see statues, maybe, of admirals and generals and political leaders and artists, but you won't see statues of committees. You just won't. And the reason for that is that for a society or for exploration, the individual is the one that makes that impact. And time needs to be put aside to allow the creativity of the individual. It's very, very important, and I think a lot of companies kind of forget that for reasons I'll talk about really quickly. Now, the problem with people, passionate oil-finding type people, is they make mistakes, like everybody. And for a company to work well on near-field exploration in particular, not only do you need a cultural environment that allows innovation, but you have to have early collaboration, bringing in the value assurance processes and excellence processes that are so important. This is a quote from something I'm sure everyone who's worked the North Sea has read. It came out 2 years ago, Exploration Well Failures in the North Sea by the OGA. And it's a very important one because, as you'll see in the next slide or two, it shows you what is really the problem and reason behind a lack of prospects in a lot of companies right now. So this slide is kind of wrapping it up, and what I'm showing on this slide is that to get the near-field exploration working well, an organization needs to be inclusive of both exploration and production. And that organization needs to then bring in the technologies that are quite important, which are fundamentally cloud collaboration. It's also the frontier skill sets, it's data mining, and it's model driven, and it's evergreen. And when you bring that all together, you start to empower yourself a little bit more at avoiding the problems that were listed in that report I just mentioned from the Oil and Gas Authority. That's a pie chart showing reasons for failure of 98 sub-commercial wells in the last few years in the UK sector of the North Sea. And it's kind of scary. You know, if you're an exploration leader and you look at that, you start to think, well, you know, I don't want to repeat those mistakes, especially in this environment. And so it's kind of reminiscent of a Tolstoy quote where he said in Anna Karenina that all happy families are the same and all unhappy families are unhappy for different reasons. Great quote. And so every well has a chance of being hammered for one of these reasons. And the way around it, of course, is to have subject matter experts advising the local passionate oil finders early on in a non-invasive, non-threatening way. And that's not what always happens. What happens quite often is a company says to their oil finders, well, keep your eye on the ball. Just keep your eye on the ball and don't make mistakes and, you know, get on with your work. I see that at a lot of companies. So do you. And what's the problem with that is a lot of the cognitive research of the last 20 years shows when you put that type of message on creative people, you destroy their ability to notice things. And one interesting experiment 20 years ago, 2 Harvard postdocs ran a interesting experiment. They took a bunch of people like you, put them in front of a TV screen, and said, there's 2 basketball teams. Some of you may have heard of this experiment. And they're going to be passing basketballs between themselves and in a very complicated manner. Keep your eye on the ball and count the number of times that ball was passed. And when it was finished, they said, how many times was it passed? Most everyone got it right at 15. I see some people smiling. You've heard of this. It was 15 passes. And then they said, did you notice anything unusual in the process? And what happened in this wonderful experiment, in the middle of this video, a gorilla walked out, pounded its chest, and kept walking, and the majority of people didn't see it. And the reason they didn't see it is when you're focused on something, whether it's value assurance or day-to-day operations, you are not going to see the things that you don't expect to see. And that was a lesson that I think has a lot of value for near-field exploration, because what is a near-field accumulation next to your platform if not a gorilla hiding in plain sight? So I think the culture is an important aspect of near-field exploration. And together, you put it all together, and it's basically a systems approach that's necessary to get it working properly. And so just to summarize, where are the prospects? I can't do a better job than Luca Bertelli. He's the Chief Exploration Officer at ENI. ENI drills dry holes like all of us do, but they seem to do something right. And the latest example was the Zohr field over in Egypt. And he said, I'll just read it, "We are convinced there's still a lot to do in already explored basins." So he starts with the assumption there's something out there to find it. And then he continues to say that he uses new geologic creative models and new technology. And implicit in his comment is that together what you get is a better chance at breaking open a new play. And so to summarize, near-field exploration is all about tuning organizations and cultures to be able to take hold of and use all the wonderful technology we've been seeing and will see in the next few days here at Schlumberger. And there are at least 5, probably a bunch more reasons why, how to do it. And the first, of course, is data mining. And I think machine learning is going to play a big role in near-field exploration, integrating production information with the geologic and seismic. At the same time, though, the frontier exploration people are essential to work with the asset people. That's done, of course, in many companies, and that's essential. Teams need to be organized for global teamwork, and the only way that I know to do that is with cloud technology, unless you're all in the same office. Even if you're all in the same country, the size of corporations these days, it's always better to have a collaborative environment like that. That environment should be model-driven, and those models should be evergreen. And very importantly, and I'd say this is, in my opinion, the most important, is that you need to have a culture that balances creativity and process. And putting it all together, near-field exploration, as I started, it's not exploration. Exploration doesn't have the strong data mining component and the need to integrate across organizational barriers. And it is a system. And I think it's time we all looked at it as a system, and it'll help us all move forward. And so I'd like to make some acknowledgments. Had a lot of good discussions at Schlumberger. First and foremost, Demetrius Stellis, who's over here, and Ravi Chibber and Dave Paddock, and Rune Wald over at Apache was very helpful, as was Hank Creenan, ex-Shell guy, some of you might know. So thank you very much.